I worked the night shift at a mid-range hotel off Interstate 80 in Pennsylvania. Nothing fancy, 4 floors, beige walls, free breakfast, the kind of place truckers and exhausted families stopped at because the highway signs promise clean beds and safety. I took the job after dropping out of community college, thinking overnight work would be quiet. Most nights were. That's what made the basement so unsettling. The hotel basement wasn't meant for guests. It housed laundry machines, storage cages, old furniture, and the boiler room. Only staff had access. And yet, almost every week, someone would mention footsteps beneath their room. Slow, dragging steps that moved long after midnight. At first, I brushed it off. Old buildings make noise. Pipes knock. Floors creak. But then a guest from room 214 came down at 3:17 a.m., pale and shaking, and asked me if we were doing construction below him. He said he heard metal scraping concrete for nearly an hour. I told him no one was working overnight. He stared at me for a long moment and said, "Then who turned off my bathroom light?" I laughed awkwardly and blamed faulty wiring. He didn't laugh back. He checked out before sunrise. 2 nights later, I heard it myself. I was behind the desk doing inventory when a sound rose up through the floor. Slow footsteps, uneven, like someone dragging their heel. They moved directly beneath the lobby, pacing back and forth. I froze, listening. The steps stopped. Then something heavy thudded against a pipe, hard enough to make the desk lamp tremble. I radioed maintenance. No answer. I checked the security monitor. The basement camera was black, labeled offline. That was strange. It had been working earlier. At 2:40 a.m., the elevator dinged. No one had called it. The doors opened on their own, revealing the empty car. The panel lights flickered, then the B button lit up by itself. The doors slid shut. The elevator began to descend. I told myself it was a glitch. I told myself a lot of things that night. What I couldn't explain was the smell that followed. Hot metal, mildew, and something sour, like old sweat trapped in concrete. By 3 a.m., a guest called from the 3rd floor saying the hallway felt wrong. She said the air was cold and smelled like rust. When I stepped out of the elevator on her floor, she wasn't exaggerating. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees, and the lights buzzed like insects trapped in glass. At the end of the hallway, the exit sign flickered, then went dark. And beneath my feet, I felt it. Movement. I went back downstairs and locked the front doors. Policy be damned. Whatever was happening, I didn't want anyone else coming in. That's when the phone rang again, this time from a number that didn't exist on our system. The caller ID read, "Basement." I stared at it until it stopped ringing. Then the elevator dinged again. I should have left. I know that now. But curiosity and fear can mix into something dangerous. I grabbed the master key and a flashlight from the drawer and headed toward the staff-only door behind the lobby. The basement stairs were narrow, concrete, and colder than the rest of the building. Every step down made my ears pop, like I was descending too fast. Halfway down, the smell hit me again, stronger this time. The flashlight beam shook as my hand trembled. At the bottom, the hallway stretched farther than it should have. I'd been down here before. It was never this long. Storage cages lined the walls, but the labels were wrong. Room numbers that didn't exist, dates from decades ago, and names scratched into metal. One cage door was open. Inside was a housekeeping cart, old and rusted, with towels folded neatly on top. They were damp. Warm. I heard breathing behind me. I spun around. No one was there. But the flashlight flickered, and for just a second, I saw footprints forming on the dusty floor, bare feet, deep impressions, walking away from me toward the boiler room. I followed them. I don't know why. Maybe because I needed proof I wasn't losing my mind. The boiler room door was ajar. The boiler room was louder than usual, metal groaning, pipes hissing like whispers. The temperature inside was unbearable. Steam clouded the air, making everything hazy. And in the center of the room stood something that made my stomach drop. A mattress. Old, stained, pressed directly against the boiler. Burn marks covered the fabric. Chains were bolted into the concrete floor around it. Above the mattress, scratched into the wall, were words carved so deep they looked gouged. The breathing came again, closer now. I turned slowly. Someone was standing behind the boiler. He was tall but bent, his posture twisted like his spine never healed right. His skin looked grey, blistered in places, as if he'd lived too close to heat for too long. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring through me. He spoke without moving his mouth. "Night shift," he said. "You see us now." I stumbled backward, nearly falling over the mattress. The man stepped forward, and I realized he wasn't alone. Shapes began to move in the steam, other figures, crawling, standing, watching. I understood then. They weren't ghosts. They were people. People who never checked out. The man raised a hand, and the lights went out. In the pitch black, I felt hands brush past me, not grabbing, just guiding, steering me toward the mattress. Voices filled the room, whispering in unison. Sleep fixes it. I screamed and swung blindly, hitting metal. The flashlight came back on, and the room was empty. No mattress. No chains. No writing. Just the boiler. I ran. I didn't stop until I burst into the lobby, gasping. The elevator doors were open, frozen between floors. The basement button was cracked, spiderwebbed like someone had smashed it from the inside. Morning came eventually. When the manager arrived, I told him everything. He didn't laugh. He sighed. He pulled out a yellowed blueprint of the hotel and pointed to the basement. "There's a section that isn't on here," he said quietly. "Older than the building. We keep it sealed." I quit that morning. A month later, the hotel closed after guests complained of heat failures and unexplained injuries. Last I heard, it was being renovated. But sometimes, when I drive past at night, I see lights on underground, and figures moving where no rooms exist. I didn't believe in haunted hotels until I worked security at a downtown Chicago hotel that catered mostly to business travelers. The kind of place with polished marble floors upstairs, and something much older buried underneath. I worked nights, walking floors, checking exits, and watching cameras until sunrise. The basement level wasn't for guests. It held industrial laundry machines, electrical rooms, and a freight elevator staff used to move linens. Guests weren't supposed to know it existed, but they always found it. It started with complaints about missing time. Guests would say they went looking for ice or vending machines late at night and somehow ended up back in their room hours later, with no memory of walking there. One man insisted his shoes were wet and smelled like bleach when he woke up. Housekeeping complained too. Towels vanished. Entire carts disappeared overnight, only to reappear days later in locked supply rooms, neatly folded but ice cold. Then one night, a housekeeper named Rosa didn't come back from her break. Rosa had worked there for 15 years. She didn't wander. She didn't forget rules. Her break time ended at 2:15 a.m. By 2:45, her supervisor was calling my radio, panic creeping into her voice. We checked her last known location on camera. The footage showed Rosa pushing an empty laundry cart toward the service elevator at 1:58 a.m. The doors opened. She stepped inside. The doors closed. The elevator didn't move. At 2:02 a.m., the elevator doors opened again. The cart rolled out. Rosa did not. We froze the frame. The inside of the elevator was darker than it should have been, like the light never came on. The maintenance log showed no movement, no error codes, nothing unusual. The elevator was still parked at basement level. I volunteered to go down. The basement smelled like hot fabric, detergent, and old water. The laundry machines were silent, though they should have been running non-stop. The service elevator doors stood open, waiting. Inside, the walls were scratched badly, deep gouges running from floor to ceiling. Fingernail marks. Blood, brown and old, stained the rubber floor mat. The elevator panel had more buttons than upstairs, numbers that didn't match any floor. One button blinked slowly. It wasn't labeled. I radioed upstairs. Static answered. Against my better judgment, I pressed the blinking button. The doors closed gently. Too gently. The elevator began to descend, not smoothly, but in short, jerking drops that made my knees buckle. The floor counter didn't change. It just kept flashing B. The temperature dropped fast. My breath fogged the air. Then I heard it. Laundry machines. The doors opened onto a room that shouldn't exist. Rows of industrial washers stretched farther than my flashlight could reach. They were all running, shaking violently, filled with something heavy. The air screamed with noise. Between the machines, figures moved, bench shapes pushing carts, folding sheets, dragging loads across wet concrete. They wore hotel uniforms. All of them were soaked. I stepped out without realizing it. The elevator doors stayed open behind me. The floor was slick, cold, and stained. As I walked, the machines began to slow, one by one, until the room fell silent. Every figure stopped moving. They turned toward me at once. Their faces were pale, bloated, eyes red as if burned by chemicals. Mouths opened, and the smell of bleach became overwhelming. One woman stepped forward. It was Rosa. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak. When she did, water poured from her mouth. "It doesn't end," she whispered. "The shift never ends." Hands grabbed my arms from behind. Dozens of them. They pulled me toward an empty cart, metal rattling as it tipped over. The machines roared back to life. I fought harder than I ever have. I kicked, screamed, bit, felt teeth sink into something soft and rotten. I broke free and ran, slipping, slamming into machines until I reached the elevator. The doors were closing. I dove. Something grabbed my ankle, nails digging in. I kicked blindly until it let go. The doors shut, crushing fingers that vanished as the elevator lurched upward. The ride back up lasted seconds. The doors opened to the normal basement. Silent. Empty. I collapsed. When backup arrived, they found me shaking, bleeding, clutching a single damp towel with the hotel logo stitched on it. Rosa was never found. Officially, she quit without notice. Unofficially, the laundry elevator was sealed. Cameras were removed. Management told us to never speak about it. But sometimes, around 2 a.m., guests still complain. They say they hear washing machines running beneath their rooms. And the smell of bleach never quite goes away. I managed a roadside hotel in northern Nevada for 6 years. Desert on all sides, one gas station across the road, and nothing else for miles. We catered to long-haul drivers, late-night travelers, and people who didn't ask many questions. I worked mostly evenings, but once a week I covered overnight shifts when staff called out. That's when I learned about the door behind the ice machine. Guests complained about the ice machine on the first floor breaking down constantly. It rattled, hummed, and sometimes screamed like metal tearing itself apart. Maintenance replaced it twice. Nothing helped. The sound always came back around 1:30 a.m. One night, a guest from room 109 told me he heard someone crying behind it. I told him the same thing we told everyone. Old pipes, bad wiring, desert heat. He nodded, but his hands were shaking. At 1:42 a.m., the ice machine started again. But this time, I was standing 10 feet away. The noise wasn't mechanical. It was rhythmic. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 more. From behind the machine. I crouched and shined my flashlight underneath. The beam reflected off something metallic. Hinges. There was a door back there. I called the owner. He hesitated longer than usual before answering. When I told him what I'd found, he went quiet. "Don't open it," he said finally. "That door isn't for guests." I asked what was behind it. "Something we sealed," he replied. "Years ago." That should have been enough. It wasn't. I unplugged the ice machine and rolled it aside. The door was narrow, metal, and painted over so many times it blended into the wall. A padlock hung loosely from the handle, rusted, already broken. As I pulled it open, a wave of cold air spilled out, carrying the smell of mold and copper. Stairs descended into darkness. The basement below wasn't like the others I'd seen. No boilers. No laundry. Just a long concrete corridor with doors on both sides. Each door had a small square window, like an old holding cell. Some windows were covered. Others were not. I passed the first open window and froze. Inside the room, a bed sat bolted to the floor. Leather straps dangled from its sides. The walls were scratched raw, layered with years of marks. Written over and over in shaky letters were names, hundreds of them, all crossed out. I heard breathing from farther down the hall. Not one person. Many. The lights flickered on overhead without warning. At the end of the corridor, a door stood open. Inside, shape shifted, people sitting, standing, rocking back and forth. They all looked at me. Their faces were wrong. Sunken eyes, cracked lips, skin stretched tight over bone. Some wore hotel uniforms from decades past. Others wore nothing but stained sheets. One man stepped forward. His voice was dry, like paper tearing. "Checkout is never," he said. The doors along the hallway began to open. Hands reached out. Fingers curled around the door frames. Whispers filled the space. Names, dates, room numbers. I backed away, heart hammering, but the stairs were gone. The hallway stretched longer, bending where it hadn't before. They moved closer. I ran. I don't remember how long. Minutes. Hours. The walls blurred. The whispers grew louder until they were screaming. Then I slammed into metal. A door. I burst through it and collapsed onto cold tile. The ice machine hummed behind me. Morning came. The door behind the ice machine was gone. Just a solid wall. No seams. No hinges. The owner arrived early. I told him everything. He nodded. "That's why we don't renovate," he said. "Some guests don't leave. Some can't." The hotel shut down 6 months later. I still hear the knocking sometimes. 3 taps. A pause. 3 more. If you ever hear that sound behind an ice machine in a hotel hallway, don't look. Because once they see you, they start saving you a room. Before you leave, understand this. Every story you just heard was reported as real. No monsters. No legends. Just places people checked into and never fully checked out of. If this video made you uneasy, that means you're paying attention. So don't turn the lights off yet. Hit like, subscribe, and stay with this channel, because the next story might sound uncomfortably familiar. And remember, basements are never empty. They're just waiting.